Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. Let's continue our discussion that we started before on payroll. Now, in the first session, we talked about, the important things to know, the basics of payroll. Today, we're going to talk about the 6 common payroll issues. Now, these aren't all of the common payroll issues, but they're some of the main ones, and I thought this was a very good thing to talk about. Now, the thing you need to know is that payroll plays a large role in companies for a reason. Now, the reason that is, it's the cumulative sum of all the financial records for employees' salaries, which includes their work wages, deductions, and bonuses. Now, this is really a critical area of your business, and it's imperative that you pay close attention to this. Now, one of the things that I will tell you as a professional accountant is, in my view, the best thing to do is really outsource your payroll. And we're going to talk about that in our next session when we talk about the top 5 reasons for outsourcing your payroll. But let's just say you decide to keep it in-house. Payroll is a straightforward concept, but it's not foolproof. Processing employee payroll is still subject to various common errors despite the time-sensitive nature of such as finances. The following are 6 of the most common payroll issues that companies tend to deal with. So let's jump right into it. Now, the first one is inaccuracy of information. Working with inexperienced payroll processors. This could be the case, whether you're doing it in-house or if you're outsourcing it. At times, dealing with payroll-related tasks can be a chore. One of the things I've seen when people talk about payroll, a lot of times their voice will drop in, oh, it's time to do payroll. Or, the person that's selected in the organization, might not be the best person, in the organization. Sometimes it's left to an inexperienced employee. And on occasion, an employee or third party's inexperienced with their client's workforce information can lead to them making crucial mistakes during the processing of such information. Now, that could be something as simple as, have they collected the correct W-4 information? Do they have the correct, employee's name, social security number? Do they have the right withholding information? Are they withholding for the right state? Are they withholding for the right jurisdiction? That's something that we see a lot of if we've got a client that's working in multiple states. Have you set up payroll processing or payroll taxes for those multiple states? And this can really lead to, big delays and issues with payroll. For example, let's say that you're a small business. Let's just say you're an electrical contractor and you happen to take a job in the state of Maryland. Well, if you've only registered to do payroll taxes in Delaware, and then you don't know any better, then you may very well have employees working in the state of Maryland. Now, the state of Maryland is going to want your employees to pay Maryland wage tax, and the state of Maryland is going to want your employees to be paying into a Maryland unemployment. So that's one of the things that we talk about, inaccuracy of information. And so the employees don't have the correct withholding. Next thing is using the correct deduction amounts. Now, processing deductions from employee pay is considered one of the most complex parts of payroll. Now, what I will tell you, even if you're going to do payroll yourself, I don't have many people who do it the old manual format where they, there's an IRS publication that says, withhold this much tax based on this much income. I definitely think you're going to want to look at using some sort of software. It's easy to make errors if you're not paying attention to what you're supposed to be doing, making sure you're withholding the right amount of Social Security or Medicare. Make sure you're withholding the correct amount for local taxes or unemployment taxes. So it's really important to make sure that you're using the correct deduction amounts. Now, going along with that is not classifying employees correctly. Now, many small businesses utilize several types of workers, including temporary employees, freelance workers, and contractors. Diversity in worker types can sometimes lead to payroll issues. It's important that workers be classified correctly for tax purposes, since businesses can be subject to their paying their owed taxes along with any fines. Now, what we're talking about is, is this person really an employee? I had a client in this week, and we were talking about, starting payroll for them. And one of the things they had mentioned to me, I was going through their books, and they said, well, that's one of our contractors. I said, well, tell me about what this contractor does. And they proceeded to tell me about everything their employee does. Now, I use the word employee intentionally because a lot of times employers or business owners, I should say in this case, think, oh, I've just got a contractor, so I don't need to worry about, payroll taxes. I don't have to worry about, federal and state unemployment or workers' compensation insurance. So you want to make sure you're classifying your employees correctly. And I've done some other podcasts or shows on independent contractors versus employees. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that right now, but that's something you definitely want to pay attention to and make sure you're putting them into the right bucket. Now, even if you decide they're an employee, are they exempt? Are they non-exempt? And that's a discussion for a whole nother podcast or show. But, you need to understand, are they subject to, minimum wage? Are they subject to, can you pay them a salary? Do you have to pay them hourly? Going right along that, the next one of the common payroll issues is overtime rules. And that's where current federal and state laws require many employers to give overtime. Overtime generally consists of 50% of the employee's typical hourly wage. In most cases, employees must pay their hourly wage and the 50% overtime premium for each hour worked overtime. Due to the exceptions that overtime laws generally include, some payroll processors may be subject to mistakes. So again, you need to make sure that even if you're working with an outside party, that you explain to them, how many hours this employee is working per day. One of the things that we run into a little bit of a problem sometimes is, we may have a biweekly client who may be sending over payroll, and they'll say okay, well, this person worked 80 hours, Ralph, this past 2 weeks. Well, that doesn't really help me because I need to know what they worked in each of the weeks, because if they've gone over that 40 hours, then they may be, they may be required to pay them overtime for that week. Even if, so for example, let's just say, you had 80 hours during a 2-week period. This is something a lot of people don't understand. Let's just say that you had 80 for two weeks, but your employee worked 60 hours the first week and 20 hours the second week. Well, technically, unless they're exempt for some reason from overtime, then you're going to have to pay that employee 40 hours regular time for their first week and 20 hours overtime. So just saying to your processor or just putting in your payroll software, hey, they worked 80 hours isn't going to work. So this is something you need to pay attention to. Another area is garnishments and child support. And this is something you need to pay attention to as well. Like in the state of Delaware, employers are required to notify the state and report, new employee hiring so that they can be checked if they have any child support garnishments from any government entities. And then finally, another big one that is a common payroll issue is just keeping up with regulatory changes. And that, what I'm saying here is, over time, payroll regulations do change. Sometimes significant changes may be made to how payroll is processed for businesses across the country. In order to avoid the payroll issues that may originate from regulatory changes, businesses should do their best to stay updated with the regulatory changes that may occur in the state or around the country. This is one that I ran into a few years back when there was a change to the minimum wage. I actually took on a client that didn't understand that the minimum wage had changed. So we had to go back and repay their employees for several months where they didn't pay them enough because they weren't meeting the minimum wage requirement. So, and that's just a factor of staying up to date on payroll regulations. So I hope these 6 common payroll issues have been helpful, and we'll get into our next discussion on the top reasons to outsource payroll in our next session.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.